The military responds with swift and ruthless efficiency, deploying soldiers, tanks, and helicopters to establish a 50-mile quarantine zone around the infected region. High fences topped with barbed wire are erected, and anyone attempting to cross the perimeter is shot on sight. The government reassures the public that the situation is under control, but inside the zone, it is anything but. Captain Alexander Petrovic and his peacekeeping unit are reassigned to enforce the quarantine. They patrol the perimeter, haunted by the horrors they witnessed in Ravnaluka. Orders are clear: no one leaves the zone, infected or not. Among the peacekeepers, whispers of mutiny begin to circulate as the ethical burden of containing innocent civilians clashes with their duty. Within the quarantine zone, chaos reigns. Cities like Veliko Polje and Draganovac are plunged into anarchy. Electricity is sporadic, and food and water supplies dwindle. Makeshift camps spring up in abandoned factories, schools, and stadiums, where civilians seek refuge from the infected and looters. The virus spreads rapidly among the dense population. Hospitals, already overwhelmed, become death traps as infected patients turn on staff and other patients. One particularly harrowing scene unfolds in St. Vasilihes Hospital, where a nurse, Milena, watches helplessly as her colleagues and patients succumb to the infection. Among the survivors is Inspector Ivan Kovac, a veteran police officer who leads a small group of civilians, including a teenager named Maha, her younger brother Nikola, and a pregnant woman, Sonia. Together, they navigate the dangers of the quarantine zone, scavenging for supplies while avoiding both the infected and increasingly desperate humans. Captain Petrovic's unit sets up a forward operating base at the quarantine's edge. From here, they oversee the military's containment efforts. The peacekeepers are ordered to suppress riots within the zone and assist in executing anyone showing signs of infection. Petrovic struggles with the moral implications of these orders, especially as civilians pled for their lives at the perimeter. One night, Petrovic's patrol encounters a desperate father, Boris, attempting to smuggle his infected wife and daughter out of the zone. Despite the peacekeepers' warnings, Boris refuses to leave them behind, resulting in a tragic standoff. Petrovic hesitates, but his superiors demand he execute the family. The incident fractures the unit, with some soldiers questioning their role in the operation. Meanwhile, Miriam Novak, still carrying the data and virus samples from the lab, remains with the survivors. She begins piecing together more information about the virus's origins and the military's role in its development. She discovers that the virus is airborne in certain conditions and mutates unpredictably. The quarantine may already be compromised. Novak contacts an old colleague, Emil Gruber, a biochemist stationed outside the zone, via a covert radio channel. Gruber warns her that the military's primary objective is not containment but eradication. They plan to destroy the entire quarantine zone with a firebombing campaign, erasing all evidence of the virus and its origins. Novak realizes they have only days to act. Within the zone, Kovac's group encounters another band of survivors led by Lieutenant Daniela Vukovic, a disillusioned soldier who deserted her post. Together, they forge an uneasy alliance, pooling resources and sharing information. Vukovic reveals that some soldiers stationed within the quarantine have gone rogue, using their weapons and training to dominate weaker groups. As the combined group moves through the zone, they face harrowing trials. In one gripping scene, they navigate an abandoned shopping mall infested with infected. Tensions flare when Marco, a hot-headed survivor, endangers the group by firing his weapon prematurely, drawing a swarm of zombies. The survivors' greatest challenge comes in the form of the rogue soldiers. Led by the ruthless Colonel Viktor Dragic, these deserters have established a stronghold in a former military depot. Dragic believes the infected zone is a new world order and intends to seize power by controlling resources and weapons. Dragic's faction captures Novak and some of the survivors, forcing Kovac and Vukovic to plan a daring rescue. During their infiltration of the depot, they discover stockpiles of military-grade explosives and chemical weapons. Novak warns that if used, these could accelerate the virus's spread. After a tense standoff, the survivors escape the rogue faction, but at a heavy cost. Several members of the group are killed, and Novak's data is damaged. However, they manage to retrieve a critical hard drive containing partial research files, which Novak believes could help her develop an antidote. The survivors head for a rumored evacuation point near Lake Crni, where helicopters are said to be extracting uninfected civilians. Along the way, they encounter evidence that the quarantine is breaking down: infected animals, empty military checkpoints, and a growing number of zombies near the perimeter. As the chapter nears its climax, the military's containment efforts fail. A massive horde of infected breaches the perimeter, overwhelming soldiers and peacekeepers alike. Petrovic's unit is forced to retreat, and he orders his remaining men to assist any survivors they encounter. The quarantine zone becomes a war zone, with the infected spilling into neighboring regions. Novak, Kovac, Petrovic, and the remaining survivors converge at Lake Crni. The area is overrun, but they spot a lone helicopter preparing to depart. In a heart-pounding sequence, they fight their way through the infected to reach the extraction point. Only a handful of survivors make it onto the helicopter, including Novak and her damaged research. As they ascend, they look down on the burning ruins of the quarantine zone, where thousands of infected roam freely. Petrovic vows to expose the truth about the virus, while Novak silently resolves to finish her work. Above the chaos, the survivors see the extent of the devastation, neighboring towns already showing signs of infection. The quarantine has failed, and the virus is spreading unchecked. The survivors, led by Inspector Kovac and Lieutenant Vukovic, discover that the rogue faction led by Colonel Viktor Dragic has fortified an old military depot, turning it into a fortress. Dragic's group has been pillaging resources and capturing survivors to enforce their dominance. Among those captured is Dr. Novak, whose knowledge of the virus and its origins makes her a valuable asset to Dragic's ambitions. The survivors plan a nighttime infiltration to rescue Novak and retrieve supplies. Using their combined skills, Kovac's tactical experience and Vukovic's military training, they sneak into the depot through a drainage system. Inside, they witness the faction's brutal rule: prisoners forced to fight infected for sport, and an arsenal of weapons Dragic plans to use to expand his control. During the rescue, the survivors trigger an alarm, leading to a chaotic firefight. Kovac and Vukovic led a small diversion while others extract Novak. The mission comes at a cost. Marko, a headstrong survivor, sacrifices himself to cover the group's escape. In the chaos, they manage to retrieve critical supplies and Novak's damaged research, narrowly escaping into the night as the depot burns behind them. After their escape from the rogue faction, the survivors head for Lake Crni, rumored to be an evacuation point. When they arrive, the scene is grim. Infected swarm the area, and the supposed extraction point is in chaos. A lone military helicopter remains, surrounded by desperate civilians and soldiers fighting off the horde. Petrovic's peacekeepers and the survivors join forces to clear a path to the helicopter. The battle is intense, with waves of infected attacking relentlessly. Amid the chaos, Petrovic's closest ally, Sergeant Ivana Yankovic, is bitten. In her final act, she detonates a grenade to eliminate a massive cluster of infected, giving the others a chance to board the helicopter. As the survivors lift off, they watch the infected overrun the area below. Lake Crni is lost, and with it, any hope of containing the virus within the quarantine zone. In the helicopter drive, Novak clutches her research, determined to find a cure. Petrovic, bloodied and exhausted, vows to ensure their fight wasn't in vain. The final image is haunting, the survivors ascending into the dark sky, with the fiery, zombie-infested wasteland stretching far into the horizon. The survivors, battered and traumatized, have managed to escape the infected hordes and the rogue faction's stronghold. They find temporary shelter in an abandoned train station on the outskirts of the quarantine zone. Resources are dwindling, food is scarce, clean water is harder to find, and tempers flare. The group is fractured, both physically and emotionally. Arguments break out over how to ration the remaining supplies and whether to keep moving or stay hidden. Marco, cynical and pragmatic, argues for leaving anyone who slows them down. Milena clashes with him, insisting that their humanity depends on protecting everyone, especially the vulnerable. Outside the station, the infected are relentless. Each night, the survivors take turns keeping watch, listening to the groans and shuffling of the undead nearby. The constant tension wears on everyone. During one watch, Nicholas spots a group of infected moving toward their hiding place, forcing the survivors to relocate quickly. In their hasty escape, they encounter a newly mutated infected, a grotesque, bloated creature capable of spewing corrosive bile. Marco manages to kill it, but the incident leaves the group shaken. Milena begins to suspect that the virus is evolving faster than anyone anticipated. The strain of survival takes its toll. Andrei begins hoarding food, hiding it from the others. When Marco discovers this, he brutally beats Andrei, leaving him barely conscious. Milena intervenes, accusing Marco of becoming as monstrous as the infected they fight against. Their argument highlights the growing divide between those who cling to their morality and those who see it as a hindrance. Sonia, struggling with her pregnancy, pleads for peace, reminding them that they're stronger together. Her words resonate with Milena but only deepen Marco's cynicism.